Allow me to introduce myself.
I am the last sane sports fan.
I am a genius by trade.
I just knew too much. Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Possibly.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to The View from the Midwest. Well, let's get right to it. Hopefully you enjoyed yesterday's video on Tim Tebow. Just an amendment there. As I said yesterday, I knew that he wasn't deserving to be a starter. He's only thrown for roughly about 2,000 yards in his entire career, and that's not a thing to write home about. But again, my contention is that I find it hard to believe that he's not on somebody's team as a package quarterback. Declare him another position. Just tell the guys, say, hey, we're willing to keep you on this team, but you need to work with us here. We're going to declare that you're this, and then we might throw you in kind of wildcat situations. But again, I don't understand why that can't work out. On to today's topic, though. It's something that I've tried to avoid so far. I did have a request for this kind of topic a little while ago, so I'll go ahead and get into it as we're kind of nearing somewhat of a decisive phase in this. The issue, for those of you who don't follow hockey religiously, is Patrick Kane of the Chicago Blackhawks is currently under investigation, and the evidence is going to a grand jury because he was accused of basically sexual assault in the Buffalo area. I have tried to avoid this case because for whatever reason, there wasn't enough coming out right away, and the investigation seemed to kind of drag on a little bit. So it was kind of one of those situations where, even though this is an opinion show, and you can give your opinion on something one day, get new information, and all of a sudden it changes later, I still didn't necessarily want to address it until there was more out there, until it kind of hit ahead. And we haven't gotten to that point, but it's also kind of the point where it's like, well, I might as well talk about it. Simply because of the fact that if we focus on Patrick Kane right off the bat, the man is intensely talented. As a St. Louis Blues fan, I mean, you can see back there, I got Blues stuff all over the place. I hate the Chicago Blackhawks. I have and always will. There was a time when the Detroit Red Wings were number one in that category. Now that the Red Wings are out east, Chicago has regained its spot as number one villains on my list. But as a sports fan, you can take that out of the equation every now and then. And as much as I don't like the man as a player, Patrick Kane is immensely talented. The combo of him and Jonathan Toews is just absolutely amazing. Any fan in St. Louis, regardless of what they feel about them as fans, deep down knows that they would kill to have that duo on their team, simply because they are winners. They have proven that they know how to win. They've proven that they know how to score, and that's something that the St. Louis Blues have lacked. Decision making is Patrick Kane's bugaboo. For lack of a better term, that's what came to mind right off the bat. Early in his career, I can't remember if it was his first year in Chicago or first, second, third, somewhere in there. It was early in his career. He got into an altercation with a taxi driver in Buffalo. That had to be going through the legal system. There was a lawsuit handed out because there were assault charges on that, physical and verbal. The case kind of worked its way through the system. Obviously, Kane did not see any jail time. Whether or not a deal was struck, I can't really remember on that, but it was a situation where he didn't need to be putting himself in that kind of situation. I believe there was alcohol involved and all that kind of stuff. And again, he goes back to Buffalo. He has every right to go back there. It's his hometown. But he seems to put himself in bad situations when he's in the city of Buffalo for whatever reason. Perhaps he's got old friends there that aren't necessarily people that he needs to be hanging around with. We see that a lot in the NFL. It has managed to keep its way out of the NHL for a long time. But unfortunately, over the past offseason or two, we've seen a lot of off-season problems coming into the NHL. You had some assault cases and various things with drugs and whatnot going on with the LA Kings and a few people that were released out there. And it's disappointing because the NHL has managed to keep a relatively clean image in retrospect versus some of the other sports. I mean, you look at the NFL, it seems like there's always a rap sheet going on a mile long every offseason. The NHL seems to have a cleaner image, but now all of a sudden that's being destroyed a little bit by these lack of good decisions by players that for whatever reason don't seem to be able to keep their head on their shoulders when they're in certain situations. I don't think Patrick Kane is a terrible person. Now, if these charges are true, maybe that position changes a little bit. But again, I go back to his decision making. If you get in trouble every time you go to Buffalo, then maybe you need to stay in Chicago. It seems to be kind of a weird juxtaposition there because you would think you'd have more opportunities to get in trouble in Chicago. I've never been to the city of Buffalo, so I don't know what it's like out there. But just in terms of size and population and the opportunities afforded to you in terms of nightlife, you would think more opportunities to get in trouble in Chicago would present themselves. And for whatever reason, Buffalo seems to be the city of danger for Patrick Kane. Going to the situation at large, it's both a good thing and a bad thing for the NHL because the one thing that is good about this is the fact that very little has come out about this. And I like that in as much as the fact that since the NHL is not as popular as the NFL, you don't have people camped out on Patrick Kane's doorstep. You don't have Nichols, I can't remember her name or her first name, but Pat just sitting in his front yard waiting for him to peek out and give some sort of ridiculous, useless quote about the situation. The legal system has been allowed to take its course, and it's going to a grand jury, and once they decide whether or not there's enough evidence to press charges, then more will come out on this story. But other than that, it has been very quiet about this because despite the fact that I'm in the sports media, I don't like the fact that we have to just rush to decision on every single case that's out there and push forward our opinions on every single little detail when we don't know all the details, and the court system needs to be allowed to take its course. The court system in the United States is by far from perfect, but it is one of the still better judicial systems around the world. And a lot of times it would just be better off in terms of the public view if we would allow these things to take their course before we rush to judgment, because all of a sudden we're sitting there saying, well, this was a terrible person and he did this and he did that. And a lot of times maybe they did, maybe they are terrible people, but we're still rushing to judgment based on facts and opinions that aren't necessarily always true. And that is the one thing that I do like that has happened with the NHL. It is kind of a bad thing for the NHL because it obviously means that, well, to ESPN and several media outlets, we're not as important, so it's not as big of a deal to cover this. But it also means that the better thing can happen in the end, which is to allow the system to run its course before we really get into the meat and bones of this story. Patrick Kane needs to get his head on his shoulders. Whether or not this affects his hockey career remains to be seen. Even as a diehard Blues fan, I have to hope that this didn't happen. If it did happen, I hope that the young lady is taken care of. Whatever happened to her is just absolutely wrong and shouldn't happen to anybody. If something did happen, obviously the perpetrator would need to be punished. If it is Patrick Kane, then Chicago Blackhawks fans may be in for a long season, because even if he is allowed to play, you have to figure that this is going to be weighing on his mind. That is The View from the Midwest. What are your views on today's topics? Comment, rate, and subscribe. Give us a thumbs up on Facebook and YouTube. But until the next time, I'll see you then.